welcome to another episode. Now, just a few weeks ago, I uploaded a video on a nearly 20-year-old Cadillac CTSV versus a nearly 20-year-old Acura TL. Many of you really enjoyed that video, so I figured let's keep that theme up and running. So today we have a Subaru versus the Acura. The reason why I think both of these vehicles line up with one another is simply because of the used car market, the values. Both of these vehicles today can be purchased between $3,000 to $5,000. I'll talk more about that in a moment. Let's get started. So first up, 2010 Subaru Impreza, now with 186,570 miles. We have owned this now for 11 years. This vehicle has been in the Northeast its entire lifetime. Northeast United States, meaning snow, salt, sleet, nasty roads. This is still my wife's daily driver, roughly 300 miles a week, and she drives this into the city, meaning potholes and nasty parking spots. So this is really the perfect car for that, because who cares if it gets dinged up, and it's small enough to fit into spots, and it's been very, very reliable. But keep that in the back of your mind. This really goes through quite a bit. So originality, let's start with the hardware, the engine. The starter is still original. The AC compressor is still original. Now, it did need one recharge 2 years ago. I did a video on this. My wife came home and warm air was blowing out of the vents. Fortunately, I had a refrigerant. You know, whenever you go into the auto parts stores, especially the beginning, toward the end of the spring, early summer, you'll find refrigerant cans all over the place. And I simply used one of those refrigerant cans to recharge the system. Zero issues. Zero issues 2 years later. And I know professional shops, mechanics, you know, they laugh at that. Hey man, it worked. No issues whatsoever. So AC compressor is original, alternator is original, and the power steering pump is original. Still have the original engine, original transmission. The front and rear diffs are original. The prop shaft, all of those joints, everything's still original regarding the running, the running gear. In terms of software, how often has the check engine light come on? Only once. One time. And this is really one of the Achilles heel of the Subaru. There's really three. This can be quite expensive if you are paying for repairs. And that's for code 420. That is an issue with the catalytic converter. And I did a video on how to test and repair the catalytic converter. And if you are new here, I will have a playlist for Subaru repair. I've done all of the repairs and maintenance at home over the last 11 years. Never once have I been to a mechanic except for tires and alignment. Other than that, I've done everything. And I have a lot of videos from fluid changes up to brake pads, rotors, calipers, all the way up to pulling an engine, which I'll talk about here in a second. So that's one Achilles heel, but that's the only time the check engine light has ever come on. Every sensor is original. On the engine, transmission, and also the fuel system has sensors. Everything is still original. So it just, again, shows you the quality of the parts. The axles are still original. Excellent axles with Subarus. The wheel bearings, this is funny, the wheel bearings are excellent on these vehicles. In fact, many years ago, I'm the type of person that I go by the book. So in other words, I look at the maintenance schedule by Subaru. These guys built and engineered the car, and this being my wife's car again, it has to be dead reliable. I can't get a phone call that she's stuck in the city, now we have to tow this thing home, and it costs a fortune to do something like that. So I keep on top of everything. And I believe the manual said it recommends to replace the wheel bearings at 120,000 miles. And I replaced the front driver's side and the rear wheel bearings at roughly 140,000 miles. For some reason, I overlooked the front passenger side. And I was checking my records recently because it just went. The front passenger side wheel bearing lasted for 185,000 miles. That is just unbelievable, especially in 15 years of winter weather. Now, going to the rear of the vehicle, the rear struts are original, The rear suspension components are original, and even the rear calipers are still original. Of course, over time, I have replaced the rotors and the pads, but the calipers are still original. Going to the front, different story, completely different story. The front passenger side caliper froze last year, and that was pretty scary. Going down the highway and the steering wheel just started shaking like crazy. And I pulled over, and once I walked over to the side, front passenger side, I can feel the heat emanating off the vehicle. So that had to be done rather quickly, easy enough to do, fortunately. And then very recently, in the last episode, I showed that the front driver's side caliper was leaking. So replace that. Super easy repair, replacing calipers, fortunately. And that's the great thing about the Subaru. I would argue one of the easiest modern vehicles to work on is a Subaru. Again, this is with the boxer engine, not their 6-cylinder, but super easy to work on. Parts are pretty cheap for the most part, and you can do a lot at home. You'd be very, very surprised. The front stabilizer links, that is something that happens to go on Subarus for whatever the reason. I've tried OEM versus Moog. I happen to like Moog, but OEM has that, I think, a little bit better quality. I think I'm now on my third set for stabilizer links. So stabilizer links and catalytic converters, you'll see that often on Subarus. Front struts have been replaced. I now have Monroe quick struts. I know some people don't like them. I've had zero issues after 60,000 plus miles. The lower ball joint did go at roughly 120,000 miles. That, I would argue, is the hardest repair I've ever done on this vehicle, because the lower ball joint is pressed into the lower control arm. And the only way I was able to get it out was with a 2x4, a 3-pound hammer, wedging the 2x4 against the lower ball joint and just going to town with this thing. And eventually it came loose, but it was a pretty hard job. The lower control arms I did replace also over time. They did not fail. The rubber was starting to crack slightly, and I just replaced them out of due diligence. And the last thing that comes to mind, going back into the engine bay, I completely forgot about this. A few months ago, the original radiator started to leak very, very slowly. I just happened to notice some droppings on the driveway, and my wife came home from work, and I started looking at it, did a quick video on how to test it. You pressure test the system, found the leak, and replaced the original radiator at 181,000 miles. So again, really good quality regarding the parts. Coming to the inside, everything works as you would expect from any Japanese vehicle. I've owned a lot of Japanese vehicles over the years. When it comes to interior refinement, if you want to call it that, everything just works. Everything, all of the window regulators, in other words, nothing is scratching. Everything works, windows, door locks, all of the electronics, HVAC controls, everything works 100%. Seat heaters, no issues there whatsoever. Then going to the outside, the rear lights are LEDs, so never once have I touched the bulbs in the rear. The front ones I have replaced. In my opinion, the factory headlights are not very bright on these older Subarus, so I changed them to LEDs. It's helped, but it's not really cured the problem. But the wonderful thing on the Subaru, you do not have to pull the front bumper off. Most modern vehicles, you have to take off the front bumper in order to remove and replace the head bulbs. In this case, it's not required, which is fantastic. On the driver's side, you remove the battery and you can get access to the bulbs. On the passenger side, there's a little air box, remove that, and you have access to the bulbs. So it makes it super, super easy to work on. But the third Achilles heel, and this is by far the biggest cost, and this is something that you will see on older Subarus. I don't know when Subaru addressed this issue, but that's a head gasket issue. That happened on this vehicle roughly 135,000 miles. Now, what sort of worked out, that was the very beginning of COVID. So now my wife is working from home, the vehicle's not being used, and I figured, okay, let me tackle this job. Now, if you're paying a shop or a dealer to do the work, you can easily hit $3,000 today because you have to pull the engine for the repair. Now you hear pull the engine, That must be really difficult. It was one of the simplest things I've ever done, to be quite honest. The way that they engineered on how the engine just bolts into the body and up to the transmission, super, super simple. First time I ever pulled an engine from a Subaru, no problems, and that was over 50,000 miles ago. For me to do the work, it cost me $800, but that was because of the tools. I did not have an engine crane, I did not have an engine stand. I had to buy all of these things. But for the parts and for the machine work was roughly $500 to $600. I did a video afterwards on the total tally, but it was way under $1,000. And the beautiful thing is you learn about your vehicle. You learn what the throttle body is, what the valve covers are. And as you do that work, you're refreshing all of those gaskets. I happen to use Felpro gaskets in that case. I've had zero issues with Felpro for many, many years. A lot of their gaskets are made in Japan, so zero issues regarding that. But those are the three Achilles heel on this vehicle. Head gaskets, so if you're looking at an older Subaru, make sure the head gaskets were done. See if it's on the Carfax or get documentation from the owner. Number two, catalytic converters. They just go. In fact, the check engine light came back on 3 times over the last 2 months, again for the catalytic converter. So, and I don't think I'm going to replace it. This is more than likely the last season we'll own this vehicle, last winter season. Because to be quite honest, we've had it for 11 years, put a lot of miles, 130,000 miles on it. I don't want to keep on top of it the way I do. And we'll probably just donate it come spring. And thirdly are the stabilizer links. And the last thing that comes to mind before we jump over to the Acura, the exhaust, front to back, has been replaced. The whole exhaust, at least one time. The cat back exhaust has been replaced twice, okay? So also keep that in the back of your mind. Let's jump over to the Acura. And now we have a 2006 Acura TL with 128,000 miles. Now, if you saw the Cadillac versus Acura video, some of this will be repetitive, but I'm going to make this a lot shorter and sweeter because, again, I don't want to make this video too long. But the easiest comparison I can say between these two, this vehicle is way better built, way more comfortable, way more quiet. The paint quality is 1,000 times better than the Subaru, but this vehicle was 50% more versus the Subaru brand new. This was $30,000 new, and the Subaru was $21,000. At least the trim that we have, that was $21,000. So this is 50% more, but man, just a better built vehicle all the way around. When you go over a bump, it's quiet. When you go over a bump in the Subaru, it can rattle a little bit, and if the bump is big enough in the Subaru, the damn sun visor comes down on you. It's so annoying. This is buttoned up at a different level. It has been the most reliable vehicle I have ever owned. I mean, that's just the easiest way to explain it. The most reliable vehicle. You simply put gas in it, turn the key, and it keeps on going. Talking about originality, the only thing I ever had to do to the engine was the starter began to fail a few years ago, and I replaced the starter with a used unit, zero issues whatsoever. Only one time did the check engine light ever come on, and that was for an air fuel sensor. Replaced that, and we're up and running. That's it. Those two issues, that's all I've had to deal with. I've owned this now for 6 years, and the original owner is a very good friend of mine. So I know the history of this vehicle. It has been superb. Comparing the two vehicles, both of them are excellent when it comes to rust proofing. Neither vehicle has any rust on the vehicle. None, which is absolutely amazing. As you can see, it's snowing here. Another season of this garbage. No rust. On the Subaru, there is some bubbling on the door, but that's it. Nothing else on the frame. Everything looks to be in really good shape. Both vehicles do have timing belts. You are recommended to replace them, I think, at around 105,000 miles. I did a video on the Subaru, and I did a video on the Acura on how to replace it at home. And then I did a follow-up on what the belts looked like, and they were in excellent shape. What I would recommend if you are doing a timing belt, do not go with a cheap kit. Something like Gates that's made in China. Don't risk it. I know the timing belt from the dealership is like 70 bucks, but go that route, because if the timing belt fails, your engine has a very good probability of being destroyed. Not worth taking the risk. Buy the factory parts. And when you do the timing belt, you also replace, of course, the bearings and the water pump. So on both of these vehicles, never a cooling issue. This still has the original radiator versus the Subaru, which failed just a few months ago. Now, the other thing that comes to mind is just when I change the oil. When I see and check the oil on the Subaru, typically at this point, every 3,000 to 4,000 miles, I'm changing that oil, and it's pretty dark, it's pretty dirty. On this vehicle, I change it up to, it could be every 6 months, every 5,000 or 6,000 miles, and it's still crystal clear, and it does not burn any oil, as opposed to the Subaru, which does burn oil. When the car's running for the Acura, you don't smell anything. No exhaust fumes, nothing. On the Subaru, you do. So you start to see these little differences here and there between these two vehicles. So that's the broad overview on the Acura. If you want more information, more in depth, you can watch the Cadillac versus Acura, and I go into really good detail on that in that video. For example, the exhaust is still original on this vehicle. A lot of the suspension components are still original on this vehicle. Sway bar links still original on this vehicle. And if you want to watch that, you can, but those are the major bullet points. The two things you have to watch out on these Acuras are the axles. They are known to snap. When I obtained this vehicle, I replaced the axles. The other thing is a battery draw issue, not only on the TL, but also the MDX and other Acuras in this time frame. And that's more than likely you have a little module up here for the Bluetooth, and you can tell you have an issue with the Bluetooth module by just placing your hand up here, and if it feels really, really warm, that's your issue. More than likely, 90% plus chance that's your issue, and you simply unplug it and it resolves everything. Those are the two biggest things I would say. Some people say the transmissions fail. I have never once an issue with the transmission. Never has it been sloppy, upshifting or downshifting. But I do maintain my vehicles. I keep on top of them. I change the fluid, and as long as you change oil and transmission fluid and diff fluid, your car will keep on going. Just take care of it. You know, that's just the main thing. Now, wrapping this up, which is the better vehicle to buy? If I had to choose one, I would choose the Acura. That's my personal feeling. I think it's better built. I think it looks way better. It's a nicer place to be. The stereo is far better in this vehicle than it is in the Subaru. However, if my son just turned 18 and he needed a vehicle, I would buy the Subaru. There's something about the Subaru that comes alive in bad weather. Snow, salt, sleet, something that I can't really put my finger on it. That vehicle just comes alive. It feels superb when there's a few inches of snow on the ground, and you just want that stability and you want that assurance that you're going to get home safely. Then the Subaru is a perfect option. So I hope that gives you a pretty good idea what to expect from these vehicles. That's what we have here, guys. I hope it hasn't been too long and that maybe you learned something that was entertaining. As always, thank you for watching.